Welcome on behalf of Hope Through Housing. This parent education series is intended for residents of National Core. Our goal is to bring you experts on topics that may be useful to you and your family. This parent education series will focus on enhancing parenting practices and behaviors, also learning age-appropriate child development skills and milestones, and promoting positive play and interactions between parents and children. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Johnson, and I am a registered associate marriage and family therapist with Christian Counseling Service. I currently work in the START and EIIS program, which services children from the ages of 0 to 9 years old. I personally have been working with children under 10 years old for the past 14 years now. And one of the number one questions that I get from parents is, Jen, why does my kid do that? And there's actually a lot of research and a lot of reasons why your kid does that. And so today, this presentation will be covering, why does my kid do that? We're going to take a look at child development. So the way we're going to break it down today is when it comes to child development, we're going to look at cognitive development, which is the way we learn how to think, and social emotional development, which is how we deal with emotions and relationships and how we learn them. We're going to look at the concept of attachment, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat on how trauma impacts development. So when it comes to developmental norms, which means that it really doesn't matter where you come from, if you're male or female or what background, every person goes through these particular stages, whether they have a trauma background or not. So when it comes to cognitive development, kind of the founding theorist to this idea is a man by the name of John Piaget. And what Piaget believes about child development is that there are 7 stages to our lives. And that is infancy, early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, early childhood, middle adulthood, and old age. He also has a concept that is known as schemas. We're going to look a little bit about the adaptation process in regards to Piaget's theory. And what that means is how we adapt. And according to Piaget, we go through these different developmental stages in 4 stages. We have our sensory motor stage, our pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational stages. So when it comes to understanding schemas, according to Piaget, schemas are a cohesive, repeatable action sequence processing component actions that are tightly interconnected and governed by a core meaning. That is a very, very fancy way of saying that schemas are the basic building blocks of intelligent behavior. And what that means is schemas are a way that we organize our knowledge in our brain. So I want you to think of schemas as index cards that are filed away inside our own personal little filing cabinet that alert us on how to react to different stimuli. And how we do that is every single thing that we encounter from the day that we're born gets stored in our limbic system. And basically what that is our 5 senses. So our smell, our touch, our seeing, our hearing, our tasting. Did I get them all? I think so. Everything that triggers us with our 5 senses teaches us something about the world. So when it comes to existing schemas, they're usually able to explain what we helps us kind of perceive what's going on around us, which puts us in a state of cognitive balance. Now, an example that I like to use is, let's say that I'm walking down the street and I smell smoke. Well, what happens? The smoke travels through the air, up my nose, passes through my limbic system. And based off of what I've personally experienced in my life, my limbic system is going to tell me how to react to this particular smell or stimuli. So it could be a car on fire, it could be a house on fire, it could be cigarette smoke, it could be somebody is barbecuing. And what happens is, again, it goes through your nose, it passes through my limbic system. My limbic system says, oh, that's just a barbecue, move along. And I go back to my state of cognitive balance. So I want you to take a second and think about how that's applicable to people who have had trauma in their lives. Now, anytime we have had trauma or abuse in our lives, those index cards get filed away and put there. And once an index card is inside our own personal filing cabinet, it really doesn't come out again. The best we can hope is that we learn how to scroll past that card and say, oh, don't need that one, but I'm going to move on to the next one. And so when we have an experience, it gets stored in us, it becomes an existing schema that we use eventually down the line. Now, infants have very simple schemas. They're more numerous and complex as we get older, which makes sense, right? Every day we're alive, every day we experience something new is a new filing index card that we get. So infants have genetically programmed schemas. And basically what that is reflexes. So for those of you who are familiar, there are different reflexes that infants do. So one of them is the grasping, which means if you hold out your pointer finger, an infant will grab it automatically. Rooting is when you kind of run your thumb along the baby's cheek. The baby should turn in anticipation to suck. And there's the startle response. So let's say the baby's asleep and you take the edge of their crib and you give it a shake. All four of their arms and legs go up in the air and they alert. And so those are existing schemas, reflexes that we're born with because we can't just start the world with nothing, right? But every day we're alive, we get more and more index cards, some of them great, some of them not very functional for our lives. So how do we accommodate and assimilate? That's probably one of the number one things to understand is that human beings have to adapt. That's one of the great parts about being a human is we adapt. But how do we do that? And what do I mean when I say adaptation? Well, it's intellectual growth as a process of an adaptation or an adjustment to the world. So we just finished talking about how schemas, every single thing that we experience is something that gets lodged into our filing cabinet. And it helps us figure out what to do. So let's say I am walking down the street, I smell that smoke. It's not a cigarette, it's not barbecue, it's not a house on fire. I've never smelled that before. I have to assimilate to figure out what that is because my body is going to say, it's cool, keep walking, or you need to get help now. So how do I learn how to do that? Well, I adapt through the process of assimilation. So assimilation is when we take existing schemas to deal with a new object or situation. So what happens is when we try to use an existing schema, so something that we've learned before, and apply it to a new situation and it doesn't work, we have to accommodate. So that is when the existing schema does not work and it needs to be changed to deal with the new object or new situation. So one example that I like to use is, let's say that the only fruit I have ever eaten in my entire life is apples. I only know how to eat an apple. When I hear the word fruit, I automatically think apple because in my world, that's the only fruit that has ever existed. And I know how to eat that apple. And I know all the different ways to eat this apple. But one day, someone comes up to me and hands me an orange. Well, I'm going to first start with my assimilation. I'm going to take my existing schema and I'm going to look at this orange and think, this is not an apple. I know that. How do I eat this thing? So I'm going to try to use something I already know how to do. And what do I do with apples? Well, I take a bite out of it. And I learned very quickly that when I take a bite out of an orange, that is not the same thing as an apple. Now I have to use my existing schema doesn't work. I got to learn something new. I got to put a new filing card in there. So I have to accommodate. And what I'm going to do is I'm still going to use some of the things that I knew how to do. But for the most part, I'm going to interact with this orange, right? I think, okay, I can't bite into it, but what about this part? Does this come off? Okay, the peel comes off. What do I do with this? Is this edible? Oh, that is not edible. And eventually I make my way into the orange, I pull it apart, and that's when I realize, oh, okay, I have to peel this thing off, then I have to break it open, then I have to pull it, and then I can eat the little bits inside. So now I have accommodated, and I now know how to eat an apple and an orange. So one day when someone hands me a banana, I'm going to have a few more tricks up my sleeve. So I'm going to remember, well, I can't bite into this the same way I can with an apple. I remember though, with the orange, you peel it first. So I'm going to try there first. I just learned something new and I'm using my assimilation, my previous schemas to apply it to my banana. And that is how individuals work. That is how we learn, is we have to interact with our world and we take everything we've ever learned and try to apply it to a new situation. And when those things don't work, we got to learn something new. So equilibration is the force that moves development along. So human beings do not like to be uncomfortable. We don't like not knowing things. We like to be the masters of our own universe. And so I am highly motivated to eat this orange, not just because I want to, but I got to figure this thing out. And here's the thing, I'm either going to figure this thing out or I'm just going to drop it and say, not worth it, right? We don't always want to accommodate. We just want to feel comfortable again. Sometimes that's learning something new. Sometimes it's giving up. But regardless, equilibration is the force that is driving us there. Because it's unpleasant when it doesn't fit, right? And so again, we do not like to be frustrated and we're always seeking to restore balance. And this is just a nice little chart to kind of show you how it all flows. We have our assimilation, our equilibration kicks in because we really don't want to be uncomfortable. You know, we have our new situation, we get thrown off, and we have to learn how to accommodate because our previous schemas just weren't cutting it. So we learn how to do these things. We build our schemas and we learn how to assimilate and accommodate over 4 stages in our lives, according to Piaget. And so the first stage is sensory motor, which is birth to age 2. And in this stage, we're learning about what's known as object permanence, which I'll break down in just a second. We have our pre-operational stage, which is from the ages of 2 to 7. And this is when symbolic thought is really all the rage in our world. Then we move to concrete operational, which is ages 7 to 11. And that's when we start learning operational thinking. And then our final stage is we have what's known as formal operational. And that is from the ages of 11 and up. And this is the time that we can start learning abstract concepts. And all of these stages are experienced in the exact same order. And it's determined by biological maturation and our interaction with the environment. So if the way we get our index cards is exploring the world, and the way that we learn new information is we're either motivated to learn or we just quit. That is how human beings work. What does that look like in the context of trauma? So the earlier you've had trauma in your life, the more your index cards are really, really difficult ones to manage. Most of the time, you try to put one in there and, oh my gosh, I spilled all my cards yet again. I have no idea what order these go in. That is people who have, like, let's say somebody has PTSD. That's what happens to them internally, is instead of, oh, I smell smoke, let me go through my index card and see what's the rational decision. They're just grabbing it and going, oh, and the cards are going everywhere and they have no idea what to do. And it's a very overwhelming, frustrating place to be. So when it comes to our cognitive development, we start with the sensory motor, which is from the ages of our birth to 2 years old. So the main achievement in this stage is known as object permanence. And what object permanence is knowing that an object still exists even if it's hidden. And it requires the ability to form a mental representation, schemas, of an object. So this is the perfect example of this is a few, right? This is why toddlers do the same thing over and over again. You will have a toddler flip the light switch on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off. Or they would take the volume to the radio and turn it up and turn it down and turn it up and turn it down. This is why peekaboo is a very important game for kiddos to play. It's not just entertaining. They're learning that I can't see you, but you still exist. That's what they're learning. This is also why when they get dropped off at daycare, grandma's house, wherever, there's some of that separation anxiety because it's not that they're worried mom's not coming back. It's mom's not in my sight. She doesn't exist anymore. And what we have to learn within the first 2 years of our life is even though you can't see it, it still exists. So again, this is when you're going to see a lot of stranger anxiety for kiddos. So then we move from the ages of 2 to 7 to what is known as our pre-operational stage. And during this stage, children can only think about things symbolically. So what I mean when I say symbolically is that they're able to take one thing, like a word or an object, and assign it meaning for something else. And this is basically pretend play. This is why we use bananas as phone. This is why our hairbrush is a microphone, is children understand the world through the context of play, imagination, and symbols. And one of the biggest mistakes that we make as grown-ups is we try to be logical with children from the ages of 2 to 7, and that's just not how their little brains are going to work. Thinking at this stage is also very egocentric, which means that it is all about us. What is in my head is the only reality that matters. And so when a person is egocentric, they have a very hard time taking on the viewpoint of others. This is why sometimes you look at your kiddos and you think, oh my gosh, they have like no empathy for anyone. They're so selfish. They only want what they want. Or, you know, she hit her brother and when he hit her back, she made such a big deal. And it's like, you just did that to him. How do you not see this kid? Because if they're in the ages of 2 to 7, they don't care. This is why you'll hear a lot of, it's not fair, right? Because it's not fair. It's injustice in their world. How dare we discipline these children and give them limits? So this is a really important fact to be aware of when it comes to a child between the ages of 2 and 7, because it really breaks down expectation. As parents, it is our job as the grown-up in a child's life to teach them, to protect them, to guide them. And we tend to lecture children, though. We tend to make children be an active participant in what they're doing. And in reality, it is going over their little head so fast. So one example is when you ask a child, why did you do that? What were you thinking? Why did you do that? And they say, I don't know. They're not lying. They don't know. They're just acting. And so, no, they don't understand that what they do is annoying or bothering other people. They're egocentric at this stage, and they're supposed to be. And as adults, it looks very selfish, right? We might even have a little bit of resentment because Grown-ups don't get to get away with this as much as kids do. Or we know a lot of very egocentric adults still. But this is a reality to understanding your child from the ages of 2 to 7 years old. If you want to get to this kid, you're going to be singing songs and playing dolls. And if you want to teach them a lesson, it's got to be symbolic, right? An example is in play therapy, I invite children to bring their stuffies or their dolls to every session. And I have all sorts of little puppets and toys that my kiddos play with, and they might not want to talk to me, but they are going to talk to my little hand puppet. Or the client or child may not want to tell me how their day was, but if I ask how Minnie Mouse's day was, Minnie had a really hard time sleeping last night. She was scared and had nightmares all night, you know? And it's like, Minnie must have been so scared. I wonder what she needed to feel better in that moment. We're not talking about Minnie Mouse. We're talking about this child, but it is how they learn and it is how they conceptualize, and that is absolutely appropriate. I do not need to take the extra step to say, Minnie Mouse is having nightmares about monsters. That's just like you. I can say that, but it's not necessary because kids are already making that connection. So when we go from our pre-operational stage to our concrete operational stage, which is 7 to 11 years old, Piaget considers this, this is a stage where we start to think concretely, and this is a major turning point in our child development because it marks the beginning of our ability to have a logical or operational thinking. Now that's tough if you have a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old. They're making a very large developmental leap in their lives. And it's difficult because they're bigger, they're more independent and self-sufficient. But for whatever reason, you have to tell them every step that it takes to brush their teeth or take a shower or clean their room. And as parents, it's really frustrating when you're like, why do I have to break this down for you in so many steps, right? We expect a lot out of kids, especially in the 7 to 8-year-old range. But they're just barely getting to a place where they can concretely think about things and in a very logical manner. They're moving from a stage that was very symbolic, very pretend, very imaginary, very about just me to, there's something else in the world but myself. There are other perspectives than my own. Not only that, but what I do might bother someone else. So again, it's just important for us to understand because it helps us with the expectations we have for our kids. Sometimes we put expectations that may not always be very fair. So when I say logical or operational thought, what I'm saying is that this means that the child can start to work things out in their head internally rather than externally. So an example is when we're in our pre-operational stage from 2 to 7, you can show me how to brush my teeth by physically modeling it for me. But what would help it stick in my brain better is if you made a step-by-step picture graph that I can follow because they need to process it externally. As adults, we don't always do that. When we're 7 to 11, we're starting to learn the skill of internally working things out in our head. And how that looks in grown-up world is, think about when you have just a really rough day at work and you're thinking, oh my gosh, like it is Friday, I am so tired. And you're looking at the clock and you think, okay, 20 more minutes and then I can take my lunch. And then I only have an hour after that. And then I am going to go home early and my suitcase is already packed and we're going, we're getting in the car and we're going on our trips. So just hang in there. Just hang in there, Jen. I can do all of that in my head to get me through my day. Or I have about 5,000 errands to run. First, I got to go to Target and then I got to go to Stater Brothers and then I have to get gas and then I got to get the car washed. We do all of that internally in our heads. Children from the ages of 2 to 7 absolutely cannot do that. And it's not until we're 7 to 11 years old that we can start to kind of learn how to do that. So this is just an example in regards to academic insight on this. So, and how concrete operational it looks. So for example, at around the age of 6, so just a little bit before this stage, children can learn to conserve a number. And conservation of a number is when you understand that something stays the same in quantity, even though its appearance changes. So I don't know if you guys remember being in like elementary school and having a 64-ounce container that is tall and a 64-ounce container that is long. Visually, if you ask a child under the age of 6, which one's going to have more, they're going to say the taller one, right? But what 7 to 11 stage teaches us is that I can take the water from this tall 64-ounce cup and pour it into my long 64-ounce cup, and it's going to fill it exactly the same because they're the exact same amount. Around 7 is when we learn about mass. 9 years old is weight. So again, these are things that are more concrete versus pretend. So then we have our formal operational stage, which is 11 and up. And this is approximately around the age of 11 that we start developing this, and it moves along to the rest of our lives into adulthood. And it's during this time in our formal operational stage that people are able to develop the ability to think about abstract concepts and logically test hypotheses. So we're moving from a pretend world to a concrete one. It's very black and white. It's very just, oh, this is this, this is this. I have to be logical about this. When we hit this stage, we're learning how to think abstractly, which goes into the concept of mature moral reasoning, or this is when we start learning things like ethics and morals and understanding why hurting people is bad. It's not that 7 and 11-year-olds can't learn that what their actions do hurt people. It's not like a 2 to 7-year-old cannot learn that what their actions do hurt people. They're just going to learn it a little bit differently. And it's not fair to expect them to retain it on their own. It will be a constant conversation. And it's not until 11 when we start making those connections that stick for ourselves. And so this is really interesting because this is right around the time kids are starting middle school, right? And we'll go into the psychosocial development in a minute, but I want you to kind of sit with that in your brain, is that we're learning kind of where we fit in the world. So now that you guys understand how our brain learns to think, I wanted to talk to you about our psychosocial development. And the theorist who is the one that is really well known for this particular area of our development, his name is Erik Erikson. And these are his psychosocial stages. And basically the theory is that throughout the different stages of our life, we always have what's known as a crisis or a task. And depending on what we've been through in that stage of our life, we either stay in the favorable outcome column or unfavorable outcome column. And it carries on with us for the next and the next and the next stages. So in the first year of life, we have what's known as trust versus mistrust. And if you guys remember, from 0 to 2 is when we're learning about the concept of object permanence. I'm going to believe that even though I can't see it, it still exists. So if I'm in the trust versus mistrust stage, what I'm going to be looking for is the world a safe place? Is someone going to respond to my needs? As a baby, you really don't have a lot of tricks up your sleeve. You have crying, and you have different cues. and either you cry and somebody picks you up and gives you what you need, whether it's a diaper or a feeding, or no one comes and responds. And as an infant, you learn crying doesn't work. So in this stage, the favorable outcome would be faith in the environment and future events. Unfavorable outcomes would be suspicion and fear of future events. When we move into our second year of life is when we're seeing autonomy versus shame and doubt. And what the favorable outcome of this would be a sense of self-control and adequacy versus feelings of shame and doubt. And if you have ever had a toddler in your life, especially a 2-year-old, you will know they are very difficult little people. It is all about, no, me, I do it. It's my way. And you know what? Great. That is a very healthy 2-year-old. An unhealthy 2-year-old would be a child who is super compliant, who really doesn't take initiative to try new things, who's very scared. I have known toddlers who you can sit them down on a couch and they will sit in the exact same spot for 45 minutes. Without toys, they just sit there because that's what they're supposed to do. That is not a healthy toddler. A healthy toddler is supposed to give you a hard time. And I know as a parent, you're probably thinking, you're crazy. No way. But again, now you know that it is important, because what you're teaching this child is that you can control yourself, you are adequate, you are competent. So what happens though, if within our first year of life, we started with suspicion and fear of future events, right? We can move from an unfavorable outcome to a favorable outcome, but how we do that matters. How we do that is dependent on our caregivers and the people around us that are teaching us. So looking at what that looks like with the foster care system, for example, what did these kids experience and what are they currently getting? And is it being corrected? Sometimes we see that. Sometimes we see children have really great responses to their foster homes because they're given what they needed to feel a sense of control and adequacy. Now, trauma doesn't necessarily have to have happened. A child doesn't have to have been removed from their parents or been through abuse to be in an unfavorable outcome. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term, but there's a term known as a helicopter parent. And these are the parents that are constantly over their child. This is a very anxious parent. So it's, what are you doing? What's going to happen? No, you're going to fall. No, don't touch it. You're going to break it. You're going to hurt yourself. And they loom over the child, or the kid's trying to figure out, how do I get this thing to work? And the parent steps in and is like, he didn't know what he was doing. I have to do it for him. No, you don't. And it might take him 40 minutes to learn how to connect these two pieces. But if this kid is trying and they're not getting frustrated and they're not breaking down, give them that space. Because once they figure it out, you just taught them you're enough. You can do this all by yourself. You will figure it out. Then we moved to ages 3 to 5. And in this stage, we're doing initiative versus guilt. So the favorable outcome in this would be the ability to be a self-starter and to initiate one's own activities. And the unfavorable outcome would be a sense of guilt and inadequacy to be on one's own. So again, let's look at what our toddlers were going through. If a healthy toddler was given the space to be the little wackadoos they're supposed to be, you're going to be able to have your 3 to 5-year-old, let's say you're making dinner and you need them to be supervised. You can set up Legos at the table, or you can set up Play-Doh, and you can say, okay, you need to sit down and play with your Play-Doh while mommy's cooking. And the child can sit there and play on their own for a while. They have the ability to manage themselves. And remember, it's really important for us to manage ourselves, because it's not just what we do, it's managing our internal selves, our emotions as well, right? So if I was in the first 2 years of life taught that the world is a scary place and I can't do anything, I'm really not going to be the kind of kid that initiates and start things on their own. I'm going to be a pretty helpless kid. Or when I do try something, I'm going to feel guilt. And no, I can't do this. Those are kids that quit very quickly. Then from 6 to puberty, we're in industry versus inferiority. And the favorable outcome is we learn the ability on how things work, to understand things and to organize. And if you notice, the age is what? 6 years old to puberty. What is our concrete operational where we learn how to think and organize our thoughts? 7. So this is the stage where we're learning how things work and how we can organize things and understand them. And if we're in an unfavorable outcome in this stage of our lives, there's a sense of inferiority at understanding and organizing. These are kids that are very scattered. These are kids that lose their homework, who never know what the assignment is because they weren't taught how to organize themselves. We're not born knowing these things. We were not given structure, which is why we're not good at doing it on our own, which sends the message to ourselves that we're not good enough. We can't do it. We shouldn't try. This is why putting kids in extracurricular activities at this age group particularly, because they need to know who they are, what they're good at, and because they're starting to create an identity for themselves. And that's really significant as they move into adolescence, because adolescence is all about identity versus confusion, which means that we're starting to see ourselves as a unique and integrated person versus I have no clue who I am, what I'm going to do with my life. What do I have to offer friends or a relationship? Or school. I'm not good at school. And I mean, school is our life when we're kids, right? And what you're doing in this stage is you're learning where you stand in the pecking order of things. And then as we move into our adulthood, we look at intimacy versus isolation. So our ability to make commitments and love another person. Or we don't learn how to form an affectionate relationship. In our middle age, we have, what do we contribute? If this is why a lot of adults, if you've ever been unemployed, it is hard and stressful to be unemployed for many people. Some people don't mind, but this is a very tricky thing because we think about our legacy. And not just our legacy, but what are we contributing to our society and our world, and who am I, and what is my professional development? How do my kids see me? And all of these things that we go through as adults. And we also look at our responsibility as adults to our communities, our contributions. And then as we hit our aging years, we look at what is integrity versus despair. So this is when we're really looking at how are we going to be remembered by, what is the legacy that I'm going to leave? And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that get put in living situations that they're totally isolated and alone. And that's a very difficult thing to sit with people in this age. Stage. Okay. So now that you guys understand a little bit more about how we learn, not just cognitively, our brains and thinking, but how we learn about who we are emotionally, personally, psychosocially. The concept of attachment is one that if you work with any kind of child therapist, you're going to hear the word attachment a lot. And it's kind of a buzzword in the field, and it's a big buzzword with modern and positive parenting. And a lot of people mistake attachment for just the relationship, or it's a bond. That's not inaccurate, but there's a lot more to it, and understanding. because everything about who we are today at this day is a direct result of what our relationship with our caregivers were like. So the kind of big names in the world of attachment are Ainsworth and Bowlby. And what they say about attachment is that it is a healthy emotional bond that is developed through early caregiver-infant interaction that provides a safe haven for distress, a secure base to explore things, and it affects the child's social and emotional development into adulthood. So let's rewind a little bit. Okay, cognitively, we've got those schemas going, our index cards. Everything we experienced is going to get filed away in those index cards. I'm sorry, I have a cat and their fur is on my face. Please excuse me. Okay. So our schemas, they teach us how to get through things, right? Now, not everyone's schema is an accurate one. So again, if I've had trauma in my life and I'm walking down the street and I smell smoke, sometimes my limbic system does not give me the right answer. All it says is danger, and I freak out. It does not process the way it's supposed to. Now, why would my index card malfunction like that? Well, I have probably been through a lot of inconsistencies in my life or a lot of trauma in my life that I'm always on edge. I never really come down from it. So carrying that with me, my physical body is doing this to me. On an emotional level, I have a parent who never lets me do anything on their own. Everything is bad or it's scary or you can't go outside, you're going to hurt yourself. Or I'm crying and no one is coming to my rescue. Those are not healthy attachments. What we want is for children to come to us when they're in distress. We want kids who are not afraid to try new things because they know if I look back, mom's right there, and not just mom's there, mom's going to react and she's going to know what I need. And of course, it's going to affect our relationships in the future. So attachment, though, it's a reciprocal interaction. A lot of people don't realize that it is a give and take, and it is something that is not a constant. It doesn't stay constant. So what I mean by that is that there will be breaks in your attachment and you'll have to repair them. That's just relationships, right? You can have a fight with somebody and still like them and care about them. You don't have to get a divorce on your first fight. I mean, you could, but it would have to be a pretty big reason, right? If you were a relatively healthy and functional person, then yeah, it's really irrational to leave your partner for your very first argument, right? It's a back and forth. So what that means is that it has to do with what the child is putting in and what the adult is putting in. And what we're looking for is, when it comes to the adult, is the adult attuned? Do they understand and really know this kid? I've met some really great families, and I always love the moms that can tell all the different pitches of their child's cry. They know that's the happy cry, that's the scared cry, oh, that's the poop cry. I have had conversations with moms and dads that could differentiate all the different types of stool that their child was producing because they're in it. They know this kid, the attunement is there. They know their child. And that's great. And not only do they understand the child, they know how to help the child. And that is a strong, secure attunement what the parent is bringing. They're responsive and they're, for the most part, correctly responsive. Nobody's perfect, right? And it's, what is the child bringing in? Does the child have what's known as cues, right? basically we're talking about like their body language and their ability to communicate to us, particularly when they're not verbal. And not only that, but is the child responsive to the caregiver's attempts to console them? So your baby's crying and you're thinking, oh, it's like 11:30. I got to get this bottle ready. I'm late for my feeding for this kid. Or the opposite, we have babies that don't cry. Again, those are not things we want to see. We want babies to cry. But there's a reason that they don't, right? What happened to them in their cognitive and social cycle development to make them feel like crying is not an effective way of communicating your needs? And so it's really, really hard to be a parent or a caregiver that's attuned, that knows how to, like, I know what's wrong with my child. But the problem is that the child is not responding to your attempts to help or console them. You're stuck, right? You're trying every trick you know, and it's not working. And it's such a desperate place for a parent. And it really impacts the attachment. So this is just a quick rundown of what this looks like over the span of our lives. So the first attachment style we have is known as, it's a secure attachment. So this is when you take your child to daycare, you drop them off, and there's some distress when the parent leaves, and when the parent comes back to pick up the child greets them, they're happy, and they reconnect. And what that child looks like as an adult is they're very comfortable in their relationships. They're people who are able to seek support from their partners. There are people that say, babe, I had a really hard day. Can I talk about it? I know you're going to listen to me. Then we have the avoidant attachment. Now, this is when the mother drops the child off at daycare, and when she picks him up from school, he doesn't even look for her when she's there. He only focuses on the environment around him. So it's like, hey, mommy's here. And they're like, okay, so are my Legos. I'd rather be doing that. That's an avoidant attachment. And what that type of person looks like as an adult is they're very dismissing. They have a very great sense of autonomy. And what autonomy is basically like independence. They're very self-sufficient people. And they tend to cut themselves off emotionally from their partners. So it's, well, it's my problem. I didn't want to bother you with it. I'll just figure it out myself. Or like, oh, just let me do it. Like, you can't do it right. We're very independent and easily get smothered by our partners when you have a dismissing attachment. Then there's resistant attachment, and that is when you drop your child off and they're very upset upon departure. And then not only that, but they're not comforted when you return, and they explore very little in that time. So the difference between secure and resistant is, yeah, both of them cry when mommy leaves me at the daycare center, but a secure attachment, the child just cries for a few minutes and is able to kind of move on from their day. Someone that has a resistant attachment is one that this is like 2 hours after drop off and the kid is still crying. Nothing is making them feel better. They don't want to nap. They're just disrupted all day. And not only that, but when mom and dad come to pick them up, they're start crying again, and they're clingy. They don't want to let go of you. And that is something that is a resistant attachment. So how do those people look like as partners, as adults? Well, it's a preoccupied attachment. These are people that are very clingy in their relationships. They have a very strong desire to maintain closeness. And there's a lot of fear of rejection from their partner. Then we have the disorganized attachment. And that's when there's a lot of contradictory behaviors and there's fearfulness of the mother. So a disorganized attachment would be a child who wants you to pick them up and they're crying and you pick them up and they immediately want to get put down. And you're like, okay, so what do you want? You want to sit on my lap? Fine, here, sit on my lap. And they slide off and they're, no, and you're just, what do you need from me right now? I don't understand. It's very conflicting. So how do these people look as adults is there's what's known as unresolved attachment. There's feeling of being unworthy of positive regard, and you'll see a lot of people with social and behavioral problems. So how does trauma come into play with a lot of this? And I hope kind of along the way you've been kind of paying attention to, okay, this is kind of how we work. How does this apply to my life or my kid? I'm going to tell you, once I learned about attachment, so many things clicked for me personally in my own life of no wonder I do X, Y, Z. Oh my gosh, like I didn't get that career. No wonder I can't do this. And so trauma does play a really big part into it. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through this video, but I am going to invite you to watch this video that's known as the still face paradigm. And what this is, and there's actually one where there's one that's the dad's trying the still face experiment. And both of these are on YouTube. And very long story short, the experiment is they set down a child who is interacting with her mom. They're laughing, the child's pointing, mom's responding, and then mom disengages for 2 minutes from the child, just staring off to the side, and the child goes through and is trying all these things to make mommy notice me. I'm going to squeal, I'm going to point, I'm going to clap, I'm going to do all those things that were getting your attention a minute ago. So she's using her schemas, right? I clap my hands, I make that screechy noise, mommy responds. Uh-oh, mom's not responding. I need to assimilate and figure out a new way to get mommy's attention. And I'm starting to get uncomfortable because mom's not responding to me and I'm 1 year old and I need to know that this is going to be a constant thing in my life or else I'm not going to trust the world. The mother doesn't engage for 2 minutes and the child very quickly deteriorates. She very quickly falls apart and starts crying and is really disrupted. And then the mom jumps back in and gives her attention again, and the child bounces back relatively quickly. So that is an example of a secure attachment, right? So even though there was some distress, the child was able to get back on track very quickly with the parents responding, and that's what we want to see. So I really invite you to take a look at the still face paradigm. It's fascinating. And I want you to think about, what did you notice about the breakdown? So, when it comes to development, when children feel grounded and that they have a secure base, they're comfortable and willing to explore the world. They're willing to meet new people and try new things. And again, it always goes back to our initial interactions, because those are the key to a baby's success, that as well as the child and adult that this baby will become. When we have unresponsive caregivers, so this video, this experiment was only 2 minutes long. And in that 2 minutes, like I said, the baby fell apart very quickly. But fortunately, she was able to have her mom respond, and she jumped right back to where she needed to be. But what happens for some of these kiddos where that disengaged parent is not just 2 minutes, it's their entire lifetime. Nobody responds to this child's needs, at least not in a supportive way, right? Their needs might not get met. A parent might react, but they might react with a hit or some kind of a punishment or a rejection of love. And it's something that adults don't realize that they do to children, or there's circumstances in individuals' lives where they can't do that. So unfortunately, what happens when we have unresponsive caregivers, when that 2 minutes is our whole lifetime, of course we're going to have trouble trusting people. We don't have a consistent parent. We're going to have trouble relating to others, particularly if we don't even know who we are. How are we supposed to know how we relate to other people when we don't really even know anything about our own selves? And they're going to have trouble being calm to explore the world. There's going to be a lot of anxiety. So what does this mean for therapy? Right? Well, if this is how we start and those index cards never leave our bodies, what hope do we have? There's a lot of hope. I said at the beginning of this presentation that the number one question I get is, why does my kid do that? And the second question that I get the most is, are they ever going to get over it? No. The answer is no. No one really gets over anything that they've been through, right? It's something that happened. It gets stored away inside of us. And it's not about erasing that moment from our lives. It's going to be about learning how to move past that. Because when we have a situation and we have to grab our schemas, our index cards inside of us and shuffle through for the correct response, if we're only pulling from the first card every single time, that's not a healthy card. The good cards are about 3/4 of the way in. Skip all these and go here. And if you accidentally grab one of the non-functional cards, you can easily be like, what? No, actually, I don't need this one. I have a better one. That's ultimately what we want in our brains to do, is we never really get over what happens to us. We just learn how to integrate it into who we are. And why it's important to understand development is you saw those 4 stages. Those 4 stages of learning things like object permanence and moving from symbolic thought to concrete thought to abstract thought. We're going through a lot in those times of our lives. And every single time we hit a new developmental stage or we hit a new situation in our life, whether it's a new job, we start college, we get married, we become parents ourselves, we have to be caretakers for our parents. Anytime we have something new in our lives, we learn how to overcome and integrate our past experiences. We have to learn how to do it again, but for this stage. And we're going to learn the tools that will apply to this stage of our lives. And it is a constant growing process. And that's the same thing with therapy, is learning that you can't take away what has happened to you, but you can learn how to manage it. You can learn how to let it be a part of what you've gone through and understand why you have the reactions you have to things and move forward with your life. And when it comes to attachment in children and relationships with parents, the repair part is the most important part. Parenting is not about not ever making mistakes. Parenting is, a good parent is not a parent that doesn't mess up. It's a parent that probably messes up a lot, but learns from it. And one example that I have that just comes to the top of my mind is something that I've seen with caregivers many times, but something that I've also experienced with working with children, because as much as I love working with kids, it can be trying, right? They're lucky they're so cute. I think that's why they're made that way. But as an adult, especially one that has so many responsibilities, it doesn't help if you're a single parent. It doesn't help if you're if you're fostering a family member. these kids are going to get to you, and you're going to have a day where you're going to lose it on the kid. You're going to snap. You're going to say something that you're going to regret to this kiddo. You're going to have an unfair reaction to them. You're going to be very dismissing from them. Those moments, yeah, we don't really want them to happen very often, but they happen. And that moment never happening is not really what the child needs. What the child needs is that, what I said earlier at the beginning of this presentation, is we can fight and still love each other. We can have an argument or a disagreement, but that doesn't mean that we can't be family anymore or we don't love each other. It's just what happens. And you are the model for teaching this child the repair. And so actually, Dr. Tronick speaks of that in the still face example, is that, you know, the baby was in distress because mom wasn't responding, but mom stepped in again and all was right with the world. And that's great because, again, who wants a crying baby? But why it's even better, and it's even better that the child was in distress and then mom came into it, is what this child learned is that I can feel this way. I can feel scared or confused, but that's temporary. Mom is going to come back. The discomfort is not going to last forever. I mean, as human beings, we cannot sustain that much. You know, we pass out before anything. But a lot of us don't know how to tolerate those really big feelings because no one taught us to sit with them. And nobody really gave us the repair. Some of you guys might have, which is great. A lot of other people haven't. And I'm sure you probably know some people in your lives like that. So what I want you guys to do, what I invite you to do with someone in your life, is try this attunement exercise. So what I want you to do is find a partner and that you guys sit face to face together. And person one will be the talker and just start talking about anything, something casual. Person number two will be the listener. And after person one just kind of starts talking and gets into the groove of what they're saying, person number two will randomly disengage. You can look at your phone, you can just look away, you can just play with your nails. And you're going to do that for a few moments, and then you're going to re-engage at a random time. And then you guys will switch places and repeat that. And I want you guys to pay attention to what your experience was as the talker. So speaking to your partner who just disengages, what was going through your head? Were you angry? Did you just want to shut down? Did you talk louder? And as the listener, how difficult was it for you to disengage? For me, when I did this exercise, I had a partner who started playing on her phone, and I could not concentrate on what I was saying. And I just stopped talking and I did one of these moves and was just like, and it's funny because I was genuinely offended by this person who was a stranger that I met at a 4-day training, by the way. So it was already awkward. But I was very upset with her. And what was going through my head was, you don't want to listen to my story? Then fine. I'm not even going to talk to you then, if that's how you're going to be with me. That was what my initial reaction was. And I knew the purpose of what we were doing. I saw the exact same slide you're looking at. It's like, I knew this was going to happen. And it had that impact on me where I shut down. Other people in our group talked about how some of them started talking louder or faster, started trying to move their body to get the attention of their listener. And when I was the listener, it was so hard for me to disengage. I felt so guilty and bad. And a lot of people felt that because as human beings, we're meant to have reciprocal responding. And so it was a really interesting experiment. And so I really invite you guys to take the time to do this with someone. And it doesn't have to be long. It could be like 5 minutes total. But it'll give you a good perspective on the idea of attunement, meaning there's so much unspoken things about relationships and learning and parenting that we're really not aware of. And the more you learn about these kinds of factors, the better kind of, not just parent, but person you'll be. You'll have better relationships because you have a little bit more insight as to what you personally do and respond to, and how that's connected to what your life was like. And you're going to be able to relate to your child in that aspect and give them something that you wouldn't have been able to give them otherwise. So that concludes this presentation today. I want to say thanks for hanging in there with me. I really appreciate your time. And hopefully this was something that was helpful for you in understanding. This is my contact information. Again, my name is Jennifer Johnson, and I work at Christian Counseling Service. And if you have any questions, any concerns, feel free to reach out to us. We're always here to help support you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.